поэтому они очень держались, так вот, будем говорить, очень дружно.
How did you vote at the referendum of 1990s about the preservation of the USSR?
Я особисто голосував за те, щоб зберегти.
In early August of 1991, U.S. President George H.W. Bush visited the USSR. After meetings with Gorbachev in Moscow, he traveled to Kyiv, where he delivered a speech in front of the deputies of the Supreme Soviet.
When Americans talk of freedom, we refer to people's ability to live without fear of government intrusion, without fear of harassment by their fellow citizens, without restricting others' freedom. And yet freedom is not the same as independence. Americans will not support those who seek independence in order to replace a far-off tyranny with a local despotism. They will not aid those who promote a suicidal nationalism based upon ethnic hatred. And may I simply say, may God bless the people of Ukraine. Thank you very, very much.
Коли ми вже прийняли декларацію про державний суверенітет, і депутати із залу сесійного зверталися до нього. Ну, ви ж можете з нами спілкуватися як із країною незалежною. Ми вже ухвалили декларацію. Здається, Сергій Головатий виступав тоді. На що президент Буш сказав, що ми можемо ставитися сьогодні до України приблизно так, як до Квебеку у Канаді. І розуміючи небезпеку для суверенності Канади, виходу Квебека, хоч ці тенденції там спостерігалися, він тут сказав, що треба триматися гурту, триматися Союзу.
But President Bush was not being entirely sincere. Immediately after the outbreak of the Cold War, the United States actively supported Ukrainian nationalist organizations. The United States gave refuge to Ukrainian nationalists who had committed war crimes during the Second World War. In 1959, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Captive Nations Act 8690, which declared that the independence of oppressed peoples is in the vital interest of the United States, and Ukraine stands out as one of the main victims. In 1988, the 1000th anniversary of the baptism of Rus is solemnly observed in the USSR. As part of his new political thinking, Mikhail Gorbachev invites U.S. President Ronald Reagan to Moscow for the occasion. Reagan rejected this offer. His reason for refusal was his objection to the USSR's policy towards the Greek Catholic Uniate Church and the Orthodox autocephalous churches. There was no doubt that such a step did not go unnoticed in Ukraine. August 19th, 1991, the August coup in Moscow.
Дамы и господа, друзья, товарищи.
Gorbachev was removed from power. Most of the regional leaders in Ukraine supported the initiators of the coup, the State Committee on the State Emergency. Leonid Kravchuk took a wait-and-see attitude without issuing any strong statements. 2 days later, the coup attempt failed. Kravchuk then pushed the declaration of state independence in the Supreme Soviet.
Ідея незалежності, ідея суверенітету була привнесена в суспільну свідомість якраз представниками руху і іншими і депутатами, і політиками. До певного часу це сприймалося мовною фантастикою. Я навіть брав участь у підготовці тексту. Справа в тому, що я на той час сам створив і очолював більшість у парламенті.
This is the third declaration of independence of Ukraine. Ukraine and its history. The first happened in 1918 when two Ukrainian states were formed in what is now present-day Ukraine. The Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, with its center in Kharkiv, and the Ukrainian People's Republic, centered in Kyiv, which was quickly replaced by the dictatorship of Hetman Skoropadsky, and which was restored by Directorate member Simon Petliura. From the very beginning, we see two trends emerging. A course towards an alliance with the West, in this case with Germany and Poland, that of the Ukrainian People's Republic, the Skoropadsky Directory, and B, that of a federation with Russia, the Ukrainian SSR. As a result of the civil war and complete disinterest in Ukraine on the part of the West, the Ukrainian People's Republic lost. It ceased to exist, although members of it remained as a government in exile. The second declaration of independence took place in Lviv in June 1941. Yaroslav Stetsko, a leader of the pro-Hitler Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, proclaimed a Ukrainian state and allied it with Nazi Germany.
Дуже штрих характерний, який пояснює ситуацію того часу в Україні. Акт про незалежність розпочинався із славослів'я на адресу Бориса Єльцина. Сьогодні, коли зустрічаються ті, хто мав причетність до ухвалення акту про незалежність, починаються розмови про історичні там здобутки тих, хто боровся за незалежність і так далі, і так далі. Обходиться увагою ситуація, яка була тоді в Москві. І їм незручно, що я тут присутній, і запитую, чекайте, а чого ж ви не починали писати акт про незалежність із славослів'я Єльцина? Ми вийшли з кабінету голови парламенту Кравчука, і там біля, називається предбанник такий, круглий зал. Ще раз подивилися текст, я попросив, давайте викинемо ці слова про Єльцина, бо пройде небагато часу, будемо соромитися, що до такого історичного документу долучили прізвище, не зовсім достойної людини. І сьогодні, коли дають оцінку тим подіям, то все-таки треба виходити з формули. Я переконаний, вона абсолютна. Незалежність України стала наслідком розвалу Союзу.
Я в той час вже більше став спілкуватися з людьми такого демократичного спрямування, оскільки я внук людини, яку в 37-му році вислали до Сибіру в Житомирській області, то я це сприйняв дуже позитивно, ці зміни, які так відчувалися в повітрі.
In September 1991, Kravchuk traveled to the United States seeking support for Ukrainian independence. In Ukraine, a campaign for an actual secession from the USSR began to unfold. Amid a rapidly deteriorating economic situation, sentiment was that the Republic was able to fully provide for itself, and that the Soviet Union was simply a heavy burden on Ukraine.
When the idea of separation from the USSR started to develop among the people's movements, how strong it's radicated in people's mind?
Ну, можно так сказать, что прежде всего социально-экономическая позиция и такое отношение к социальной политике, экономической политике самого курса. Упала зарплата, хуже стали работать предприятия. И в этом время появилась новая политическая сила, которая говорила о том, что нам нужно отделиться, разделиться, выйти из Советского Союза для того, чтобы мы лучше жили.
USA. On November 28, 1991, President Bush announced that the United States would recognize Ukraine's independence if approved by a referendum held on the issue. Kyiv, December 1st, 1991. The Declaration of Independence was approved by an all-Ukrainian referendum by a majority vote.
In 1991, the parliament adopted the Declaration of Independence of Ukraine, and this was against the will of people. You're a doctor of laws. How do you interpret this decision?
Ну, с точки зрения
национального украинского законодательства и законодательства
uncontrollably. It was so sci-fi. But I think also, and in my own experiences with whatever the infection is, it's the neurological. It's bizarre. It's your body sort of turning on itself. It's unrecognizable symptoms.
Graphene is a superconductor and is going to lodge in wherever there is the greatest electrical conductivity in the body, which is the central nervous system, brain, and heart. And since it is toxic, well, what it is going to do in some way is immobilization of limbs, alteration of the central nervous system in general, paraplegia, all kinds of anything related problems with the central nervous system. And in the head, it will cause neurodegeneration and even erase memories. Lack of memory is another one of the symptoms. The heart, especially when it enters cardiac activity, it also enters into electrical activity. Therefore, graphene goes directly to the heart to impregnate it. As it is toxic, it impregnates the myocardium. It will then generate myocarditis as it inflames everything. If it does so in the pericardium, it will make pericarditis. In addition, graphene absorbs radiation and generates electrical discharges. Those discharges break the normal pattern of the heart, generating arrhythmias, and these arrhythmias result in fainting with sudden death. It is exactly what we're seeing in athletes and those people that are walking quietly down the street who died suddenly. Furthermore, graphene is a potent carcinogen. We are also seeing that cancer skyrockets after the vaccine.
Okay, Ricardo, I want to understand. I know that it's not only, I mean, obviously the heart is, the myocarditis is the most famous, but also the fertility issues, the elephant in the room of all the miscarriages, the menstrual cycle disruption, the abnormal bleeding. In particular, it seems that this attacks the ovaries.
Yes, of course. Graphene also affects the hormonal regulation of the cycle of women. Therefore, it generates all kinds of irregularities. It also affects the motility or mobility of sperm. Therefore, it generates infertility in the population. Also, in neurons, it generates neurodegeneration.
Wait a second. I want to talk about the difference between the virus, the sick illness, as opposed to, because there's people who are not injected, like myself, who have had symptoms that he's describing. So that's first. And then I really want to know, why give boosters if you've already got this graphene that's self-assembling?
As I said, I also have received the impact of radiation. Radiation has multiplied by 16, especially since the sixth wave appeared here in Spain. Radiation affects the whole world. However, it will affect those vaccinated with graphene more. That's why they know when a wave starts with such absolute precision. They just have to push a button.
Some people don't get sick. Some people haven't been sick. So why are some of us susceptible to whatever, to the radiation and others not?
It depends on many variables related to radiation and intrinsic variables of the individual. The radiation accumulates in the tissues. Therefore, it will depend on the distance to the telephone antenna, the exposure time, and also to the directionality. And then internal variables of the individuals, like our antioxidant levels, our lifestyle habits, whether or not we ground. It's a complex of variables.
So why does ivermectin seem to be effective? It's a massive antioxidant.
It probably has some antioxidant capacity. We know that N-acetylcysteine works, and it does so because it raises levels of glutathione. Quercetin, vitamin D, zinc, they're all antioxidants. Melatonin What they're doing is to raise the antioxidant balance above the toxic balance, so that the cytokine storms doesn't appear, which is what kills the individual. That is why obese people fall with harder COVID than other individuals, because they have low levels of glutathione. People over the age of 65 have a low level of glutathione. Young people have a lot of glutathione. That's why COVID doesn't affect so much young people.
Trying to understand just the up and down nature of it. You'll have an illness and then there'll be a pause and then it will come back incredibly aggressive.
It usually generates pulses. We are measuring electromagnetic pulses. Pulses can kill instantly, especially a person that is vaccinated with graphene.
Are you also seeing graphene present on masks or on these endless swabs or also in other products?
Graphene is present in masks. Remember that millions of them were withdrawn in Canada, Spain, and so on. Graphene is present in the hydrogels as it appears in the patents. It is present both in the antigens and PCR tests. That is why the PCR goes straight to the blood-brain barrier. Let us remember that the objective is the brain, and of course it is present in the vaccines. That is to say, all the elements that have been given to us to protect ourselves or prevent the disease are the ones that potentially develop it.
In the first lockdown, the 6 weeks, I came out of lockdown and I personally traveled across the country and I saw tons of towers covering that were not there before. So during this terrible emergency, and where only essential workers were there, that's what they were doing. So we definitely, so clearly there was, I have always said from the beginning that clearly there's a connection, though I couldn't say what. That's the very first thing that I noticed when I was let out, first time.
Indeed, everything was stopped except for the technological implementation of 5G. It is very important to highlight the importance that everything appeared in Wuhan. It was the first pilot city in the world where 5G technology was implemented in November 2019. After the influenza vaccination, probably with graphene. What probability would be, or there is, that a city of 11 million coincides with the start of an epidemic in time and in space?
So, but it's interesting that Wuhan, if Wuhan was also the first to start 5G, they also have that, one of the highest level gain of function labs in the world. So is that a cover-up as opposed to the 5G?
Exactly. Pangolin, bat soup, or artificial laboratory virus. Everything is brainwashing, so for the one that doubts to go directly through that path. In my house, since November, that they began with the 6th wave, radiation in volts per meter has multiplied by 16. We suffer from headaches, fever, noise in the ears, dizziness, night sweats. Welcome to the Omicron variant.
So, even if we were to get rid of our iPhones, the 5G towers, that would already mean that there's no protection against the massive dose of radiation.
If we remove all the telephone antennas, we eliminate the artificial environmental electricity that harms human biology. We eliminate the gun. Not only to the human biology, dead birds have fallen, pigeons with bilateral pneumonia. However, it is not necessary to remove internet. We can use fiber optics. Let us remember that telephone antennas with this intensity are harmful. But especially to the vaccinated, because it multiplies the signal.
You know, this is interesting because we're watching tons of athletes dying young at their peak of their health, dying on the field, and I understand also you're collecting other people who are just dropping dead in their cars. Do you want to say more about that in general?
Yes, we're seeing traffic accidents going in crescendo
con salidas de vía.
with road exits, and usually they're produced as they pass by a telephone antenna. Sometimes even the news picture has the damaged car near the telephone antenna just behind it. How this usually happens is that the vaccinated person or graphinated person receives the impact of the radiation. It then generates an arrhythmia, loses conscience, collapses, and loses control and dies. It is important to note that the person is already dead before. That is, he dies of a sudden death before crashing his car. Also, there are people that disappear and appear dead without any signs of violence.
Posteriormente, sin indicios de violencia, muertas.
Divers and bathers in general dead on the beach or in the pool. Graphene is a material that is affected by pressure. It means that it generates electricity by pressure when it is deformed. So a person takes a bath, he receives the pressure of the water. Also in altitude. So people that fly on the plane or pilots or hikers, mountaineers who practice mountaineering in places with a lot of signal. And an important topic that we have not talked about, but I would like to mention, graphene has precisely the optimal field effect transistor at the frequency of 26 gigahertz. And the governments, both in Spain and in other countries of the world, will soon approve the frequency 5G at 26 gigahertz. When that happens, we expect a real collapse of both neuromodulation and deaths.
Neuromodulación y de muertes.
In other words, there is an exact frequency quality at which graphene is excited at its maximum splendor, just as a glass can shatter with a sonical note.
Una nota desde el punto de vista sonoro.
So essentially, Ricardo, you don't see this as a eugenics operation. You see this as a remote control. This is literally the purpose is the control. Or do you think that also the loss of life is a helpful outcome for those in charge? Who do you think is in charge of this? And how do we protect ourselves?
Well, both. In the first part, to eliminate a large part of the population, especially the adults who came from the old system. And in the second part, to behaviorally control the remnant. Therefore, it is not a pandemic of a non-existent virus, but a full-fledged genocide. The crime weapon, the Trojan horse, is precisely graphene introduced in the vaccines. That is why it's hidden, as a criminal tries to hide the murder weapon. However, the ultimate purpose of the whole operation is to get all that technology to work inside the body. We're talking about the mental or behavioral control of the entire world population remotely and wirelessly using the 5G signal. 5G is not for the telephone, it is for the vaccinated. Graphene oxide can act by digitally parasitizing the individual. It breaks the neural synapse in a way that graphene can collect from the neurons the electrical impulses and translate them into a screen. And at the same time, instructions can be issued to alter the behavior of the individual. This is the plan of the World Economic Forum,
Económico Mundial.
the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and Mr. Klaus Schwab, transhumanism. There are some visible faces,
Visibles.
however, they are not especially the ones that have really executed the plan.
Las que han ejecutado realmente el plan.
The visible faces are among the most prominent Mr. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, the President of the European Commission,
De la Comisión Europea.
Ursula von der Leyen, and then let's say that there are certain options. Bill Gates in a lower step,
Más bajo.
Bill Gates with the control of the financing and endorsement of the pharmaceutical corporation, Mr. Soros in the media and economic issue,
Económico también.
and Elon Musk
Elon Musk.
that will occupy the subject of artificial intelligence.
So if they're talking already about a 1-year vaccine, I mean, that could be insanely lethal amounts of, that's what Berla is talking about. That the next vaccine that they're making would be one that lasted a year, so they didn't have to send people to boosters. So maybe they've been testing out the lethal levels of graphene oxide that you could have in there.
Probably in the last vaccine, what is going to be introduced is graphene oxide in nanoparticle format. When the size of graphene is less than
Inferior a
35 nanometers, it can cross the blood-brain barrier.
cerebral.
Once in the neurons, they supplant the natural neural network with an artificial neural network. It's a form of digital parasite.
Ultimately, how can people protect themselves?
Well, both vaccinated and unvaccinated people,
Vacunada.
the